In this file, I want to start by drawing three shapes. So first, press R for the rectangle tool and draw a small rectangle to the left side of your screen. Then press C for the circle tool and draw a circle next to it, about the size you see on my screen. Then we're going to draw a half circle. So start by taking the 2-point arc tool, press A for the 2-point arc tool, and off to the right of the circle, click once, then move your mouse down, click a second time, and then move your mouse to the right. And here you want to move in the red direction, but we want to get a half circle inference. So you'll need to move very slowly. It's possible to move quickly and move right past the inference I'm looking for, but if you move slowly as you get close to what might be a half circle, it'll jump and say half circle. Go ahead and click there, and you'll have drawn a half circle arc. Then to complete this half circle, let's press L for the line tool, and up at the top, click on the top endpoint, and then draw down in the green direction to the bottom corner endpoint, and you'll get that surface to fill in. Now these three shapes we're going to use as the basis for some 3D models. So press down on your center mouse button to turn it into the orbit tool, and then move your mouse up to begin orbiting up into 3D. Let's orbit around, so click down on that center mouse button to turn in the orbit tool and orbit around a bit so that we get this square on the left-hand side, and hold down Shift as you orbit to pan it over. We want to focus on this square first before focusing on the other shapes. Let's push-pull this up into a box. Press P for push-pull, hover over that face, click on it and let go of your mouse, then move your mouse up to push-pull the box, and then click to finish. So we saw in an earlier lesson that we could draw a box using the line tool. Clearly, using a rectangle and then the push-pull to make a box is a much faster way. Now let's suppose that we want to push-pull up a cylinder and a half cylinder, and we want them to be the same height as the box. There are two ways we can go about this. Let's try each. So I'm going to get a better view here by holding down on the center mouse wheel and the Shift key on the keyboard. I can pan over, then let go of the Shift key and of the center mouse wheel button. Then with the push-pull tool, hover over this surface of the circle, click on it, begin push-pulling up, and to infer the height of the box, just move your cursor on top of the box and click to finish the push-pull. If you orbit, you'll see that that's now push-pulled up exactly to that height. Now another faster way to do this, the push-pull tool remembers the last distance that you push-pulled. So hover over this surface here and double-click, 1, 2, and it will push-pull it right up to that exact same height. Okay, for the rest of this lesson, we'll look at how the Move tool works on these 3D shapes in some similar ways and some different ways. So press M for the Move tool and orbit your view around and pan your view over so you're looking a little bit more at this first box. Okay, with the Move tool in 3D now, if you hover over any of the faces, you get that same active highlighting that we got in our 2D Move tool lesson. You can also hover over the edges and you see that those highlight, or you can hover over endpoints and those do as well. Now in 2D, if you hovered over one of the faces, so go ahead and hover over a face here, click on it and then begin moving the mouse. In 2D that moved everything, but now that this is connected to a three-dimensional object, we see how we're just editing that three-dimensional object. We're not actually moving the whole thing. So before we worry about doing that, hit the Escape key on your keyboard. Remember that lets go of an operation in progress. If you want to move this entire box, you'll need to pre-select it. So press the space bar on your keyboard to switch to the Select tool. Now in 2D, a single click, pick to face, that still works here in 3D. A double click, so click 1, 2, would get the face and all of its edges. That still works here in 3D. But to get the entire shape, you can triple click, 1, 2, 3. So again, you have to triple click pretty quickly. I'll click once in white space here. And if you triple click too slowly, you're not going to get the result you need. So it's 1, 2, 3. And it's like electrical current. It gets everything that touches everything that touches everything but it won't jump across any sort of air gap and pick up any of the other stuff in the model. So it gets this entire object. With that entire object selected, press M for the Move tool. And now it doesn't matter where you click. You can click anywhere to begin moving this object, and you'll move the entire thing together. So this is why I recommend that you pre-select entire objects to move before trying to move them so that you don't accidentally edit them. I'll go ahead and click to set this object back down. Now switch back to the Select tool, press spacebar on your keyboard. Click once in white space to deselect everything. Just like in the 2D Move tool example in an earlier lesson, we can also use the Select tool to draw selection windows around things to pick them. So if you click and drag from left to right, you get everything that's entirely inside. So you get some faces and some edges here. Whereas if you go from right to left, you get everything that's touching. So you get a different set of edges and faces. Just one thing to be careful about, if you orbit around to a view where you have those other objects in the background, and you go to select, say, just this box, if you drag a selection window around the box, at first, from this angle of view, you might think that you didn't get anything else back there. Nothing looks selected on those half cylinder and full cylinders. But if you orbit around, you'll notice those bottom edges got selected, or in your case, maybe some other stuff. So that selection window will look through all the way back in your model and will get everything else behind it. So if you only want this object, you just either need to get a good angle of view so that when you draw your selection window around it, you'll get everything. Or if your object isn't touching other stuff, you can use the triple click method. So I clicked once in white space to deselect, and then triple click 1, 2, 3 to get everything selected. Now that's if we want to move everything. But what about editing this shape with the Move tool? If you have things selected like I do, click once in white space to deselect everything. Then press M for the Move tool. Now try a few things. Try moving a face, so click on a face and begin moving it. You notice you can tilt it in the red direction, you can tilt it in the green direction. You can also move it up in the blue direction. It looks like push-pull. In this case, I'll lean it in the red direction a little bit, so go ahead and click to lean that in the red direction. Now hover over this top outside edge, click on it, and begin moving it. You can move it in the green direction, so go ahead and click there to finish that. You can also move endpoints, so hover over one of the endpoints and click on it and move it around. Notice that once you start moving an endpoint, so I'll go ahead and click to set mine down, you have these extra edges that showed up. These are called fold lines, and this feature is auto fold, where SketchUp tries to keep, say for example, this top rectangle here, it tries to keep it together. So it was one surface. We moved the endpoint here, and when we moved that endpoint, that surface was going to have to be deleted because it was no longer going to be coplanar. It was a closed loop, but not coplanar. Instead of getting rid of that surface, SketchUp drew us in a fold line. So you can think of this like origami. It's like the top surface here is a piece of paper, and we have a little bit of a fold in that piece of paper to give this a little bit of a shape in this direction. You notice then the same is true on the sides. We had to get a little fold line here for this to get bent a little bit, and we had to have a little fold here to get this to bend a little bit. So whenever you move endpoints, sometimes edges as well, in 3D, you might end up with these fold lines. So go ahead now and play around for just a couple of minutes, moving some endpoints and some faces, and you can kind of see how that will change what your shape looks like there. Okay, now let's take a look at the Move tool on the cylinder. There's going to be some similarities, and there'll be a few different things. So first, orbit till you have a view that's a little bit looking down like I have here. I'll zoom in just a little bit as well. If you hover over that top surface and click on it with the Move tool, and you start moving your Move tool around, it'll look like a push-pull. But you notice that you can't move to the green or red directions. It only seems to want to go up and down. So whenever you have this kind of a restriction with the Move tool, where you're trying to move something in three-dimensional space, but it seems to be locked only in one direction, you can override it. So looking down at the bottom left corner of your screen, again, we have some information down here, as well as some keys on your keyboard that will give you some extra functionality. Now, if you're on a Mac, you'll see that it says Command equals autofold. If you're on a PC, it'll say Control equals autofold. So autofold, we saw earlier, sometimes it automatically creates those fold lines. But in other cases, SketchUp is not autofolding. It's locking you from autofolding. And to turn it on, you actually have to press that key first. So as we're in the middle of this move, press the key, whether it's Command on a Mac or Control on a PC, and now try to move your cursor around, and you'll notice that you can move this in any direction. So go ahead and just lean it over in the red direction a little bit and click to set it down. Now, hover around that outside cylindrical surface where it's all highlighted blue, click and move, and you'll notice this moves the entire object around. So go ahead and click to set it down. That cylindrical surface is connected. The edge at the top is this entire top circle. The edge at the bottom is the entire bottom circle. So that's why you get the entire object. It's still recommended to pre-select the whole object to move it around as one, but just helpful to know that's why that's all moving as one. Okay, now let's try something else. Hover over the top circle edge. So not the surface, but the edge. And I want you to hover along these endpoints and keep hovering around. Notice that the entire edge has remained highlighted blue. Keep hovering around from endpoint to endpoint to endpoint until you hit an endpoint like this one where the edge stops being highlighted blue. So notice the endpoint before, the edge is blue, and then I get to an endpoint where it's not highlighted blue. Click on that endpoint and begin moving your mouse, and you'll notice that you're affecting the radius of the top circle. And it's being affected independent of the rest of the shape. So the rest of the shape is having to update. So you can do something that's funnel-like or cone-like. Go ahead and click to set that down. The endpoint that you clicked on is known as a middle endpoint, and there are 4 of them at 90 degrees relative to one another. So if there's an endpoint here, if I keep hovering around, there should be a middle endpoint on this side. Click and move it around and click. If I keep hovering around at about 90 more degrees, there should be another one. Click and move it. And then again, if I move around and click, move, and click to set that down. So there are 4 of them at 90 degrees relative to one another. The same is true on the bottom circle edge. So hover around the bottom edge of this cylinder that's actually just made up of a circle down there. And if you hover around from endpoint to endpoint, you'll finally find the endpoint where it's no longer highlighted blue. Click, and you can now adjust its radius. And I'll go ahead and click to set that down. One more thing to try. Hover over that cylindrical surface where it's all highlighted blue, and then move your cursor across the surface slowly, and you'll eventually hit a point where there's a dotted line. So it's not a point, but you'll get to an area where all of a sudden it stops highlighting blue and you get a dotted line shooting from the top circle to the bottom circle. Go ahead and click on this and begin to move your mouse, and you're now adjusting those middle endpoints relative to one another. So if I click to set that down, there's a middle endpoint at the top, a middle endpoint at the bottom, and hovering along the surface, there's an imaginary dotted line that will pop up, and that's connecting those two. Click on it, and you can adjust both relative to one another. So I'll go ahead and click to set that down. So just an interesting set of features for using the Move tool to turn your cylinder shape into some other shapes you might need. Now, the last shape we have over here, let's pan over. Remember, hold down your center mouse wheel and your shift key together to get the pan tool, and then let go of both. So let's take a look at our half cylinder and compare it to how the Move tool worked with the other shapes we've tried already. So with the Move tool, hover over that top surface, anywhere along that top surface, click on it and begin moving. And we'll remember from the last example, we can move it up and down in the blue direction, but if we were to want to move it, say, in the red or green direction, we need autofold to be invoked. And to invoke autofold, we're going to need to come down and look at our key commands here. And we see on a Mac that Command equals autofold. On a PC, it'll say Control. So press that key on your keyboard, and now you should be able to move it in any direction. Go ahead and tilt it in the red direction for now, and click to set it down. Now, just like we saw earlier, there is a middle endpoint. So hover on the top edge and hover from endpoint to endpoint and hover all the way around till you get to the point where that blue highlighted edge is no longer highlighted. So it'll be roughly in line with the midpoint over here. Click on it and move your cursor, and you're able to adjust the arc length or the bulge of that arc. Click to set it down. With the circle, there were 4 of those points. With the half circle, there's only 1, and it's at kind of the apex here of that. Orbit around so that you can get a good look at the other side here, and notice that the same is true on the bottom. So if you hover around the bottom with your move tool, you're looking for that endpoint where the line is no longer highlighted blue, it just turns black. Click there, and you can adjust the bulge or the arc length there. And then, as you might expect from the cylinder example, hover your move tool cursor around, keep hovering around the cylindrical surface until you hit the point where you get a dotted line. Click on that, and that's going to adjust both of those middle endpoints relative to one another. Orbit around so you get a look that's back towards this side of things. Then take your move tool and hover over this top corner endpoint. Click on it and begin moving it around. And at first, it'll look like you're able to adjust the scale of that top arc and that the rest of the shape is kind of updating. But remember, this is just a limitation. We can move it in the green direction, but I'm unable to move it in the red or the blue or one of the random orientations. So whenever you're being prevented from moving things where you want, just remember that has to do with autofold. And down here is the reminder of which key to press, either the Command key on a Mac or the Control key on a PC. I'll press the Command key. And now move your move tool cursor, and you'll see autofold in all of its glory. It has to build in tons of fold lines to try to keep the shape together. Go ahead and click to set it down wherever you'd like. And you'll see this is why SketchUp locks down the ability to autofold sometimes by default. This shape right here, maybe you wanted to do this, but if you didn't, you really got it all twisted up pretty fast. Whereas on the other shape, it was able to build in some autofold lines pretty easily, so it didn't lock us down originally. So it's a nice feature to be able to unlock, but you also have to be careful. Of course, don't worry about it. If you ever did something like this and realized you messed up your whole shape, you're always just one click of the undo away from getting back to where you needed to be. But zooming out just a bit, these are just 3 shapes, abstract, that help us start to learn a few of the ins and outs of the move tool in 3D. And of course, we'll take the skills we learned in this lesson and we'll put them to more realistic use in some of our upcoming lessons.